Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. I hope you are enjoying the weekend. We are getting warmer weathers, although, of course, it's spring. We're getting a little bit of rain. But again, welcome to the weekly episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show, where I talk about high availability and disaster recovery solutions. Although my key area of expertise is SQL Server, um, the concepts that I talk about apply to just about all aspects of high availability, disaster recovery, and business continuity. And the exciting thing about what I typically cover is the fact that, number one, they're real life examples, real life cases of the customers that I've worked with in the past, projects that I've had the opportunity to be a part of, and learning from those practical experiences. Which it's different when you're right there experiencing it as the project is being done, or sometimes as disasters are happening right before your very eyes. Today's topic, and hopefully I can get these banners up running. Today's topic is all about designing and building resilient, high availability and disaster recovery solutions. Notice that I emphasize the words design and build. There are cases when somebody else might design and build the infrastructure or the solution for you, and then maybe it's a third party vendor, maybe it's a managed services provider, or a consultant or contractor that was brought in. They took care of the designing, they took care of the building, and then handed it off to you or your team for you to take care of. And now that is completely different because, well, they're the ones who knew exactly how it was designed, how it was built, and so you have no control over that. Besides, it's already done, right? That's a completely different thing. I'll talk about that in the future, where somebody else already designed it, they already built it, and they just handed it off to you for care and feeding and day-to-day operations. But let's focus on designing and building. Let's say, for instance, you are the lead engineer, or you are the senior DBA, or maybe a sysadmin, and you were given the responsibility to design and build resilient, high availability and disaster recovery solutions. Now, from what I've seen out in the field, and what I've seen working with a lot of my customers, oftentimes, and I don't know if it's just my own experience, or maybe because it's the kind of clients that I attract and that come to me, it's already an emergency. When they bring me in, it's already an emergency, meaning system down, they've been offline for hours, they couldn't fix the problem, they bring me in, and that typically is the case. Of course, at that point, I have no control over the design, over the building. It's already built. It's functional. It's in production. It just so happened to be offline and unavailable. And that's why they bring me in. But when, for instance, you are given the responsibility to design and build a high availability and disaster recovery solution, you need to make sure that what you are designing is something that would stand the test of time. And what I mean by time is the life cycle of the platform. And I'm not just talking about the life cycle in terms of product support, end of life, but when you take that infrastructure design, that system design, and maybe you decide, hey, we want to upgrade. Let's say you're on SQL Server 2012, it's almost end of mainstream support, and you want to migrate to SQL Server 2022. Taking the design in, and all you did was to upgrade the version, it still works, right? That's what I mean by it will stand the test of time. Of course, you also need to reevaluate whether or not they meet your needs. So I've got like 3 things for you to really think about if you are given the responsibility of designing and building high availability and disaster recovery solutions are resilient, that will stand the test of time. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a second, I'm just an operational DBA, or maybe I'm just a sysadmin. I was just voluntold because everybody left, and now I'm the only person in the team. Or sometimes you're the only person who is more knowledgeable about the infrastructure, or maybe you have skills that nobody else on the team has, and now you're given the responsibility of designing and building the solution in and of itself. Three things that you have to consider when you're designing and building resilient HADR solutions. I did mention I'm still old school, pen and paper. I got notes. It's just me, right? Three things. The first one is to be very, very clear about the goals. And what I mean by goals is the business goals. More often than not, again, when I'm being brought in and say the environment is still in the process of being built, meaning they're doing proof of concept, they're working on the whiteboarding the solution. More often than not, what I see out in the field is that systems engineers, sysadmins, DBAs, architects, they would build a solution based on a feature. Typical, right? You go on Stack Exchange, you go on Microsoft Answers, you go on a lot of the online forums. When they post a question, we need a 3-node failover cluster with a 3-replica AG. We need 2 of the nodes on our production data center, 1 node in our DR data center. They already have a feature set in mind. They already have the idea behind what feature to use, how to configure it. The only thing that they're missing is the how, right? They already made that choice. They already decided this is what we're going to do. You have to take a step back and ask the question, what is the real goal? What do I mean by that? Well, for one, when you start designing HADR solutions, the goal, your goal meaning, is different from what the business goal is, right? Your goal is stability. 3 nodes, failover cluster, 3 replica AG, 2 replicas in production, 1 replica in DR. Again, you already have that, but that's not the real goal. You have to take a step back and ask real questions that will point you to the real goal. Because again, we as technical professionals, again, we're so fixated on the technical features that all we think about is that we start to replace the real business goal with this. What do I mean by that? Well, you might be thinking your goal is to build a 3-replica availability group running on, let's say, Windows Server 2022, SQL Server 2019, because you still have not tested on SQL Server 2022. That is your goal. But why do you want to put your databases on an availability group, right? Ask those questions. Are there clear definitions when it comes to recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, and service level agreements, right? I've seen so many cases. Recently, I was talking to a client where they have a bunch of 2-node failover clusters with 2 replica AGs, mostly for HA, and then they're using a third-party vendor for DR. And it's already built. They managed to get it up and running. It's highly available. It's resilient. And again, we're talking about resiliency here. It's resilient, never had an outage. And the only question that I asked that got them to really evaluate whether or not it is exactly what they need was that what's the business goal, right? Here's an example. Even when your databases are highly available, if the app isn't highly available, well, what's the point? Right? You can be the best DBA, you can be the best sysadmin in the whole world, where you can automatically fail over across, not across, but within data centers. I'm not a big fan of failovers across data centers. But let's say you've configured everything, you followed Microsoft best practices, you've streamlined your processes to a point where automatic failover happens all the time, and it's less than a minute. What good are your HA solutions or your DR solutions if your applications do not take advantage of it? Okay, this reminded me of one project I worked on a couple of years ago. They were moving to the cloud, and this may not have anything to do with HA and DR, but it speaks so much of how sometimes we're so fixated on what we think is the goal that we don't bother taking a step back and looking at what the bigger picture is. So we were migrating the entire platform on the cloud. They were doing some testing. The databases had been migrated to Azure SQL DB. And then after production cutover, the end user started complaining about how slow everything is. Sure, the databases have been moved to the cloud, but then they realized they did not migrate the app to the cloud. So they're crossing geographical locations between on-premises and cloud. In this case, they were on Azure, Microsoft Azure. So they did not think about moving the app to the cloud, right? Even though their goal is to move to the cloud. Same thing with HADR solutions. If you're building an HA, of course, with HA, all you have to do with your applications is, okay, we'll give it the listener name. For instance, if you're working with availability groups, we'll work with the listener name, put the listener name in the connection string for the application. We're good. But what if the application becomes unavailable, right? Multi-tier application. You got your front end, your middle tier, and then your back end database. Your back end, your database platform is highly available. What happens if the app goes down? Sure, you've spent so much time, effort, and licensing, not to mention Enterprise Edition SQL Server for your availability groups. You've spent so much of the time, resources, energy doing your research and licensing costs, not to mention your salary, but not considering the app. What happens if the app is offline, right? How good are your databases? How good are they despite being highly available if your app is not? So be very clear. Start with being very, very clear about what the real goal is. And I keep hearing people talk about technical requirements, jumping into the technical requirements immediately, talking about features, talking about implementation without getting clear on the goal first. It's just like saying, I don't know what example to use. Oh, I'll use a car. I'm going to buy the fastest car, maybe a BMW M Series, 6-cylinder that drives so fast, but I don't really know what to do with it. I know it's fast. So you've already spent the time and the money researching, but not realizing you don't know what to do with it, right? Start with being very clear on the goal. Another thing to consider, I just mentioned the app. You also have to think about the entire stack when you look at high availability and disaster recovery. And that's why I said, if you've been following the videos that I've been posting, I keep emphasizing the fact that HA and DR is a team sport. It's not an individual sport, right? In my failover clustering workshops, one of the things that I emphasize is how the concept of HA is really all about no single point of failure. So when you start to think about it, okay, your DBA, your focus is more on the database, but it goes beyond the database. Your server should be highly available, meaning no single point of failure. It's one of the reasons why there are hot swappable hard drives. If one of the hard drives fail, no need to power down the server, pull out one drive, plug in another one, everything's up and running. Of course, the assumption there is you've configured RAID for your drives. If a memory module, for instance, experiences some hardware malfunction, you just plop out one of the memory modules, plug one back in. You didn't have to power down the server, or even CPUs, hot pluggable CPUs, unplug, replug. This is the whole concept behind high availability, is that the solution has to be resilient. There is no single point of failure. And there's redundancy, there's availability, there's resilience. I've seen this before when I was still privileged to walk inside a data center, where you have multiple servers in a server room across different racks, and they're all plugged in to the same, number one, network switch. I mean, what good is that? It doesn't matter how many network adapters you have on a machine if that switch becomes unavailable. right? It doesn't matter if you have multiple uh, power supplies if those power supplies are plugged into the same power distribution unit. And again, in the world of cloud, we don't even see these, right? You have to validate whether your cloud provider actually has some guarantees on how this is implemented under the covers, right? This is where the concepts with Microsoft Azure's redundancy come in. But again, it's an additional feature that you have to purchase, that you have to subscribe to. But again, before I even talk about the technical aspect, you really have to start looking at not just the app, but the entire stack. Like having conversations with your network engineers about how to make the network stack highly available as well, resilient, right? Talking to your storage admins, how to make the storage area network or the underlying storage subsystem highly resilient, highly available. Same thing with the servers. Again, with virtualization, you got to make sure that the underlying hardware that your hypervisor takes advantage of is also highly available, right? So that's just one thing. You got to be very clear about what the real goal is. Don't just focus on database, even though you're a DBA, even though your sysadmin taking care of just the database and the database alone. Whatever it is that you are going to design and build will be totally useless if everything that's dependent on it is not highly available. Right? I know I spent so much time on that too long, in fact, but I really want you to start thinking about all of these things. The app layer, the network layer, even though you're not supposed to be a developer, you're not a network guy, you're not a systems guy, you're not a hardware guy, you need to bring them into the conversation and making sure that the entire stack is indeed highly available. That's the first one, right? Be very, very clear about your goals. The second one, and this is the only time that I start diving into the tech. The second one is to pick the right, I don't want to say the right, but the appropriate tech that would help achieve the goals, right? Pick the appropriate tech that would help achieve the goals. I kind of look at this as like taxes. You don't want to pay more than the legally required amount, right? Because one, HA and DR is already expensive. You're providing redundancy on the hardware layer. You're providing redundancy on the platform layer. You're providing redundancy on the OS. You're providing redundancy on database. You're providing redundancy on the middle tier, the app, everything. And it starts to compound when it comes to cost. And we're not even talking about labor cost. We're not talking about the human factor cost. What do I mean by human factor? Just if you're tired, if you're stressed and you're burnt out, you would cause more outages, right? You would cause more problems than you would solve them. So the idea is you choose and pick the appropriate solution that would meet the minimum requirements. And I know you might be thinking, well, what about growth? What about projection of growth? Now, that's the good thing about virtualization and the cloud is it allows you to scale, right? It allows you to scale without putting in the upfront cost today. Although, again, you don't want to stretch it too thin that you're over provisioning when it comes to on-premises virtualization. And with the cloud, you also don't want to be paying for so much that you decide, hey, we're only utilizing 10%. We need to scale down, right? Pick the right tech. Pick the appropriate tech that would help achieve the goal. Is that failover clustering for your databases, right? Automatic failover. You have multiple copies of the databases. Well, now that you think about it, we need availability groups. But then your recovery time objective is really not that strict. 4 hours, well, log shipping would work. It's cheap. You can do standard edition on log shipping. And that's why you have to start with your goals. Recovery point and recovery time objectives, service level agreements, and what's the overarching business goal that you are trying to achieve by implementing the solution. because that should be driving your choice of the technology, the appropriate technology. On the app layer, again, I'm looking at it from an entire stack. From the app layer, is that web scaling? Is that load balancing across different web servers? Are you spreading out the workload across multiple machines, multiple containers, even if you're implementing containers? Again, look at the right technology. Now, and this is one of the mistakes that a lot of people are doing, is that they would grab onto whatever new and shiny object that they see, right? Oh, we'll implement this, like Kubernetes, for instance. Let's implement Kubernetes because it's going to implement high availability and scaling, and I don't even have to worry about that. Well, take a step back. Are your apps designed for microservices? Are they ready to be ported over to containers? Because you don't want to be, re-architecting everything just so you can achieve high availability and disaster recovery. Like I said, HA and DR is already expensive. You don't want to add more into the cost by re-architecting the app just so you can achieve, using this particular technology. And I can understand some people just want to implement X technology because they want to put it in their resume and tell the whole world, look, I've done this, right? You are doing your company, the business that you work for, a disservice if that's what you do. You do that on your own time, or maybe you can learn the technology without implementing it in production yet. But pick the appropriate technology that would help you achieve the business goals, right? Technical questions, every now and then would arise. Like, for instance, I had a client a couple of years ago where they asked, can we do like active high availability disaster recovery solution? And I said, not out of the box, but first we need to understand what your goals are. That's the first step. And so we had a conversation around them having clients from all over the world. They want to spread the redirect workloads depending on where they're coming from. If they're coming from the East Coast and eastward, they're going to be hitting this particular data center. And when they're they're coming from the West Coast and anything west of that, they're going to be hitting this particular data center. And I said, there is nothing out of the box that works the way that you would want to. If you are in the work, we can re-architect the application and the data layer to what you need. But jump into the technology and picking the features and whatever is available on the version of both SQL Server, in their case, because they're using .NET, whatever feature is available on .NET or SQL Server that we just decided, hey, let's use this. No, we took a step back, going back to the first one. The point is being clear on the goal. We defined the goal. And then we said, this is what we can do, but it will require a lot of work. And they were willing to put in the work. And next thing we know, we built an architecture, a solution that is not just highly available, it's resilient, and it allows for scale out. So now all they needed to do is make some tweaks on the app that they can redirect their client requests from any data center that they want to build one on. And of course, because every company's goal is to grow and increase revenue, but the way I look at it, if a business starts increasing their data, it's a clear sign that the company's actually growing. Of course, you also got to make sure that it is clean, valid data, not just collecting everything that you don't need. So that's the second one. Pick the appropriate technology that would help achieve the main objective or the goal, right? Without having to pay more, right? I mean, why pay for Enterprise Edition if you don't need Enterprise Edition? And there is nothing in Enterprise Edition that you actually need. That's just me. I don't get extra commission for recommending Enterprise Edition license. Microsoft doesn't pay me anything whenever I tell my customer, hey, you go ahead and upgrade to Enterprise Edition. So for me, the minimum allowable feature, addition, technology appropriate to meet that need without spending more than what is necessary. That's what I go for. The third one, okay, and this is very, very important. Just because you designed it and built it doesn't mean that you are going to be the one managing it. Most of the time, I fell into this trap when I was doing a lot of designing and building for my previous companies and working for a managed services provider, is that I assumed that if I designed it and I built it, I will be managing it. For one, you already heard me say so earlier today, HANDR is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. So I cannot be the only person managing this moving forward. I need to build a team because, for one, what good is a high availability solution if nobody's available to maintain it, right? Even if it's smooth sailing, it's highly stable, it is resilient, highly available, you haven't had any issues, it is not a guarantee that it will always stay that way forever. Things will happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Just make sure that when it happens, somebody else is there. And you also need to assume that it's not going to be you. So the third thing is to have the right people. Having the right people who would manage the design once it's in production, once it's in operation. I use the analogy of, because a couple of years ago, I broke my right leg. I use the analogy of, I'm so not going to go into the emergency room or go into surgery if I find out, or if I found out back then, that the doctor is going to do the surgery has never done this before. Like I'm like a guinea pig. Maybe he's doing internship. I don't want that. Yet here we are, handing off a mission critical, highly available database or an entire HADR solution, top to bottom, application, middle tier, and database server, to people whose responsibilities are simply to open tickets and escalate, right? Because part of meeting your objectives, goals, is to make sure that you have the right people in place. What when incidents like these happen? And that's why I said it's never an individual sport. It's a team sport. You got to bring in somebody. And it's not just from your point of view as a DBA or as a sysadmin taking care of SQL Server. It's from the app point of view. Somebody has got to be available on call when the app misbehaves at 3 o'clock in the morning, meaning somebody needs to be there to pick up the phone, work with a ticket. Somebody needs to be there as an escalation point when something like this happens, right? So pick the right people. Make sure that they are properly trained on the app side, on the middle tier side, and especially on the database side, on the infrastructure side. Every aspect and every stack needs to be properly staffed according to, going back to the first one, the main objective. If your objective is 1 hour maximum recovery point and recovery time objective, you got to make sure that you have the right people in place to make sure that they can meet that 1 hour, objective. What is the escalation process going to look like? Because even if you have people there, 24/7, they're operational staff, but if they don't know what to do, they might open a ticket, but they might not know how to escalate it. I've seen cases where somebody would escalate a ticket and it ended up on a different queue and it was sitting there for hours. Well, not hours. For mission critical, maybe a couple of minutes. Sitting there for like 20 minutes when their SLA is 30 minutes and nobody has even seen the ticket because it was escalated into the wrong queue, right? So you have to make sure that the operational people are properly staffed, properly skilled rather. You have proper coverage. If you have 24/7 requirement, you got to have people 24/7, and they need to have the right skill, and they need to do what needs to be done, right? Sometimes, again, the common thing that I see when incidents like this happens is the psychology of the person who either gets the alert or needs to address the issue they're not in the proper state of mind, right? Because, well, they haven't dealt with something like this before, so they're not ready. And so you also need to make sure that they are prepared for it when things like that happens, right? So key things when you're designing and building resilient HADR solutions: number one, be very, very clear about the goals, not the technical goals, but the overall business goals. You're looking at the entire stack, top to bottom: app, middle tier, network, storage, hardware, database, everything, right? And make sure that they're all contributing towards achieving that goal. Second is you pick the appropriate tech, the right technology that would help you achieve that goal, and use the minimum feature necessary. And at minimum, again, you don't want to be spending more on, something that you don't actually need, right? And the third one is to make sure that you have the right people on staff that are properly skilled, that are available. They're both available and capable, right? It cannot be just capable or available. Somebody who's available needs to be capable, and somebody who's capable needs to be available, right? So have the right staff, have available staff, have capable staff to support whatever it is that you've designed and built as the HADR solution, right? That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. And if you need help, since you need somebody to evaluate whether or not your database solution is something that requires HADR, or if you already have one, does it actually meet your overall business objective? Or you already have one, nobody on your team knows how to manage it. Third-party vendor was responsible for designing and building it, handed it off to you, but they did not do a proper training or handover. Reach out, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session so we can have that conversation. I'm more than happy to, just explore how the environment looks like, how is it affecting the team, how is it affecting the overall goal of the business. And if I can help, I'm more than willing to do that. If not, I'll steer you in the direction that would help serve you best. Again, use that link on the screen. This will redirect you to my calendar page where you can pick and choose a time that works for you, and again, schedule a call so we can have that conversation, right? That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. I'll see you again in the next episode. Goodbye.